I'm Jim Hare. I live in Portland. I grew up in San Diego. Basically, I've stopped working for the man, so now I'm pretty much full-time making photographs for myself and working on my own projects. I lived with my grandparents from the time I was 3, and my grandmother's favorite youngest brother, Jack Wilkes, was a photographer for Life magazine in World War II, and he was the China bureau chief. There were a lot of his photographs in the home as I was growing up. There was a photograph of a Chinese soldier eating a bowl of rice with bamboo sandals, and it was an 11 by 14 print that had been made for Life. And it was hanging over my bed as I was growing up. And I guess I just thought that was part of the deal. And he died when I was about 9. And when I was 10, we went to Navy night at Disneyland, and I took a camera. And I just remember coming back, there was a hobby shop in San Diego at the Navy Training Center. My grandmother would work in ceramics, and while she was making the little ceramics, I was working in the darkroom with the sailors, learning how to print. And so it pretty much became a side interest when I was younger, and then in high school, I knew I was leaving San Diego, and I thought I would probably never return. So it became important to document all my friends, and I started making photographs of all my friends as a senior in high school. And then in college, I became the photographer. Everybody was like, well, and part of it was I kind of wanted to be behind the camera. I didn't want to be in front of the camera, or, I wasn't a big party person. But I loved the idea of making photographs and documenting things. This is I have kind of a winter and a summer mode, depending upon the light. And in the winter, I use HP5 in 120 and 4x5. So one setup, if I'm going to be a little closer to people and a little more meditative and really want to try to make a connection with people, I'll take the Rollei and the 4x5 Graflex. It tends to be, again, entertaining for people. Old guy with these old cameras. I had somebody shouting at me. He was a street musician, and he was playing drums and different things. And I said, do you mind if I do a picture? And he goes, no. And he goes, how old is that camera? And I go, I said, just 100 years old. And he was like yelling, he's taking a picture of me with a 100-year-old camera. And he was all excited and everything. So it becomes entertaining for people to see the equipment. The other setup, if I'm doing, there was we had the Women's March, and there have been a couple of protests with political things going on in town. And for that, I take the Hasselblad and the Crown. They're a little faster, and I use the Crown. I have for both the Crown and the Graflex, I have the Grafmatic back, so I can shoot 6 sheets and use the rangefinder, and it's a little bit faster. I think because I love to read and I love history, and maybe growing up with my grandparents and understanding that people went before, my first influence, I think, was Cartier-Bresson. A friend gave me a book, and it was Cartier-Bresson's photographs. When I was in Santa Cruz, I studied a little bit. I met Win Bullock informally, and then was using the Rollei. I wanted to do what Cartier-Bresson did with the quality of the Rollei, and with the influence of Edward Weston, Ansel Adams, Win Bullock. But also looking back, and I think that's primarily why I wanted the Graflex, was seeing Dorothea Lange's photographs and the way that she was able to approach people. And using the Grafmatic back that has 6 shots, the photographs that she did that are in the Library of Congress of the Migrant Mother, there are 6 shots, and you can see how she worked up to that final image and assembled that image through the 6 images. So Dorothea Lange, Walker Evans, Lartigue, it's just Gene Smith, people who cared, and people who primarily did people. Sebastião Salgado. In printing, I think And in shooting, that's the other thing that's interesting in terms of printing. As you print, I think you learn different things in terms of the way that you expose your film. Salgado has this really amazing tonality, and I read that he did primarily backlit images. So his primary light source would be backlit as opposed to the sun over your shoulder. And I looked at him and I thought about that, and I've been trying to shoot more backlit or side, with the light a little bit more extreme. And it's amazing how much more depth comes in. So it's a kind of a constant, reading about people and seeing what their experiences were. The only time I do is if I think I'm going to disturb them. And if I could make a photograph of someone in tough situation, and people will see that and immediately they'll empathize and it'll change their attitude about people and they'll want to help. Kind of Dorothea Lange and the Migrant Mother, where if I had that image and I could make that change for someone who hadn't contacted that person. I'm not quite that driven anymore, in that I become a little less optimistic about people changing their attitudes. I tend not to want to do photographs of people unless I approach them. But I've done a whole series of people sleeping in the streets. And it's a balance between what I feel I need to do in terms of documenting reality. And the most powerful country in the world still has people sleeping in the streets. I don't know if I'll ever do anything with it, but rather than wake somebody up when they're trying to get the rest that they need, I may make a photograph and not bother them. But for the most part, I'd rather talk to people. Someone asked me, how can I approach all these strangers? And some of the people look a little scary. Every week I talk to somebody, and I think there's a lot of people that no one ever talks to in a normal way. And to have just a basic conversation with somebody is a gift that a lot of people don't get. They don't get personal contact. People are either afraid of them, or they shun them, or they're embarrassed. And to be able to go talk to somebody, to shake their hand, particularly if it's women, I give them $2 after, if they agree to make a photograph. And there are times where they don't, and I still give them $2. On Flickr, there was a $2 portrait group, and I can't afford a lot, but I'm thinking they could get a cup of coffee. There was one woman that was very slim. She had this giant backpack. So I had my 4x5, the Crown Graphic, and I said, do you mind if I do a photograph? And she's like, no, that's okay, sure. And she started to take her backpack off. And I said, no, I'd like to do a picture of you with the backpack on. And she's like, I really need a cigarette. And she was kind of like pretty intense. And she was lighting a cigarette, but she had pulled out, I saw it as an axe, out of her pack. And she was sort of holding the axe. And I thought, well, that'd be really cool if she's holding the axe and looking at me. But it was really kind of a strange moment. And she was intense, and I didn't want to upset her. And I actually made a double exposure, and I hadn't intended to, but I wanted her to look at the camera and hold the axe down. So I have a picture of her lighting the cigarette and then holding the axe down and looking at me. And it actually, if I could have planned it, it couldn't have been better. It was amazing. And that was the fluke of the film, but also maybe I was a little anxious. Anyway, I processed the film and I scanned it, and I sent an image over to my son who's in Wisconsin. And I said, oh, look, this is, a woman that I met today, and she's holding this axe. And he sent me a note back, and he says, Dad, that's not an axe. That is a military-grade throwing hatchet. You should be a little more careful. At the time, after I did the photograph, I said, could I give you $2? And she said, yeah, sure, what the heck. And I handed her a $2 bill, and she looked at it, and she goes, what is this? And it was almost like she thought I'd handed her Monopoly money, and clearly was upset. And I said, no, it's real. It's a $2 bill, it's real. And she's like, yeah, okay, sure. And I could tell she really didn't believe me, but I was like, I don't want to upset her, so I'll just let it go. I did run into her a couple of weeks later, and she had a puppy and did a beautiful portrait of her with her puppy. And she said, do I still have a $2 bill? And I said, sure, I'll give you a $2 bill. And she says, I'm saving them. You know, somebody told her that they were good luck. And so she's actually saving them. So, you know, who knows? I'm not opposed to digital in terms of using it as I mean, everything's a tool. You need to make grocery lists, you know, so you don't forget, you know, the milk and eggs when you go to the grocery store. But that's not poetry. There are things that are more subtle and more beautiful that may not be totally in your control when you're using film, where digital, you push a button and you can almost get anything. To me, digital photography is almost like using a hand grenade to go fishing. You know, you're going to get something, but it's not anything that I feel that connected to. Again, it's a grocery list as opposed to the potential of poetry. Not every image you make on film is going to be poetry or Shakespeare, but I feel that the time that you spend, and maybe it's just the process is just that much more enjoyable than something that anybody can push the button, or a monkey can do a beautiful selfie. I come from a period of time where film was all there was. And there was an expression that film is cheap. And I asked somebody about that, and they said, you know, if you're in a position and you see something happening, you have to take the picture. You can't hold back thinking, I've only got 3 more shots. You have to take the picture. So I try to be prepared. I try to take plenty of film. And I try not to think about the cost of the film as opposed to being able to document something when I'm out there. And a part of it is loving books, loving a physical book and being able to sit with a book. Having a tangible copy of something is a different experience. And life is short. Having prints that you can actually hand to somebody and they can look at, that you don't need electronics or power, all you need is a little bit of light. And the physical substance of the prints can be really beautiful in terms of the weight of the paper, the different surfaces of the paper that are available, the different way that it's printed. And seeing a print that's made silver gelatin as opposed to platinum, for me, printing has helped me learn how to make better photographs in terms of if I'm making a print and I see things that are not working out as well as I would have liked, the next time I go back out, I'm trying to anticipate how that's going to be printed and how that's going to appear. So, but again, prints, the main thing for me is to be able to exchange them with someone. There's a photographer in Nova Scotia, Alan Crooks, and to be able to get a print in the mail and open that up, that's one of his prints, as well as to be able to mail him something back. So there's people that I know all around the world through Flickr and through Instagram that are exchanging prints. And the object, again, it's something that can be on the wall or in a book, that I think the access is much more personal, and I think it just means more in terms of the substance as well as the object. I've been making photographs consciously since 1971. And photography has always been sort of something on the side while I raised kids or made money or showed up for work. Now that I don't have to worry about my kids or showing up for work, I've started going through all my film and trying to organize it as well as review it and make some kind of sense out of it and try to put it in order. One of the things that's interesting is I could never afford to print everything in the past. And what I'm finding is I can pull out a roll of film and I know there's one image that I think of on that roll that made that roll a success. And I'll look at it now, 30, 40 years later, and I'll look at some of the images and I am able to scan the sheet, look at them on my computer, and then go print them. And I've found images that I just never realized were good images. So right now I'm going back through. I've also, digital printing books has become very inexpensive. And so I'm starting to look at printing books in sequence in terms of arbitrarily the subjects that I've done as well as time. So 70s, 80s, 90s, pride parades, San Francisco, sailing on a pirate ship, portraits of people and their stories, which I think is really compelling.